A man who had it all, a thriving business, a mansion in the suburbs, 2 beautiful children and a devoted wife of 15 years. From the outside, Julian Croft's life was the American dream. But behind the closed doors of their multi-million-dollar home, a nightmare was brewing. Fueled by a secret affair and a monstrous ego, he made an unthinkable choice. When his wife Clara discovered the truth, he didn't beg for forgiveness. He answered with his fists. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's the story of a brutal betrayal and the shocking court verdict that dismantled an empire and took everything from a man who believed he was untouchable. The scent of freshly cut grass and chlorine hung in the humid afternoon air of the manicured suburb of Westport, Connecticut. From the expansive kitchen window of her colonial-style mansion, Clara Croft watched her 2 children, 12-year-old Lily and 9-year-old Sam, their laughter echoing as they splashed in the cerulean blue of the in-ground pool. Everything in the frame looked perfect, like a page torn from a luxury lifestyle magazine. The pristine white siding of the house, the meticulously landscaped gardens, the high-end stainless steel appliances that reflected her strained face. It was a beautiful picture, but the canvas was beginning to fray at the edges. Her husband, Julian Croft, was the artist behind this masterpiece of a life. A charismatic and ruthlessly ambitious real estate developer, he had built his empire Croft Holdings from the ground up. He was the man everyone admired at the country club, the one who gave the most at charity auctions, the one whose confident baritone could command any room. To the world, he was a pillar of the community. To Clara, for 15 years, he had been her everything. She had met him in college. She was studying architecture, her mind buzzing with designs and blueprints. He was in business school, his eyes already set on a future of skyscrapers and lucrative deals. He'd swept her off her feet with his grand promises and unwavering ambition. "You and me, Clara," he'd whispered to her on their 3rd date. "We're going to build an empire." And they did. But while he built his with steel and glass, she built hers within the walls of their home. She'd set aside her own career aspirations to raise their children, to host his business partners, to be the silent, supportive architect of his personal life, so he could conquer the professional one. For a long time, it was enough. But over the last year, a subtle chill had crept into their gilded cage. Julian, who once came home eager to share the day's victories, now returned late, smelling of expensive whiskey and a faint, unfamiliar perfume he always blamed on a client or a colleague. He'd stare at his phone, a slight secretive smile playing on his lips, and quickly angle it away if she walked into the room. His compliments, once warm and genuine, now felt rehearsed and hollow. The distance between them in their king-sized bed had grown into a vast, cold canyon. "Another late one tonight, honey," he'd said that morning, not even looking up from his phone as he straightened his Tom Ford tie. "Closing the big Sinclair deal. It's a monster." The Sinclair deal. He'd been talking about it for months, and he'd been talking about Amber Sinclair for just as long. "My new VP of acquisitions," he'd introduced her at the company's Christmas gala. Amber was everything Clara wasn't anymore. She was in her late 20s, sharp-hungry, with a sleek blonde bob and a wardrobe of form-fitting power suits. She looked at Julian not with the comfortable love of a wife, but with the raw, undisguised admiration of a disciple or something more. Clara had felt a prickle of unease that night, a feeling she had quickly buried under layers of denial. It was just business. Julian was a handsome, powerful man. Of course, younger women would admire him. But the late nights became more frequent. The business trips on weekends where he was suddenly unreachable for hours began to pile up. A charge on the credit card statement for a boutique hotel in the city which he'd dismissed as an accidental booking for a client. A pair of delicate diamond earrings in his briefcase that he claimed were a gift for his mother, though Clara never saw her wear them. Each discovery was a small cut, a tiny tear in the fabric of her reality. She tried to confront him once, her voice trembling as she held up the hotel receipt. Julian had simply laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. "Clara, darling, you're being hysterical. Do you have any idea the pressure I'm under? The Sinclair deal is worth over 50 million. I was winning and dining investors. Do you want this life? Do you want the house, the cars, the schools for the kids? Then let me do my job." He'd turned the tables so masterfully, making her feel small, paranoid and ungrateful. She had retreated ashamed of her suspicions. Tonight, however, was different. It was their 16th wedding anniversary. She had reminded him that morning. He'd blinked a flicker of something annoyance, forgetfulness in his eyes, before his charming mask slipped back into place. "Of course, darling. I'll be home by 7. I'll make a reservation at Per Se." It was now 9:30 p.m. The reservation had long since passed. The children were asleep. A single-place setting remained at the polished mahogany dining table beside a bottle of champagne sweating in a silver bucket. Clara sat in the silence, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, measuring out each second of her humiliation. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her friend, Maria. "Thinking of you on your anniversary. Hope Julian is spoiling you, rotten XOXO." Clara's fingers trembled as she typed a reply. Before she could, another message came through. It was an alert from the joint credit card account. American Express. A charge of $785.42 has been approved at the Gilded Lily restaurant. The Gilded Lily, a notoriously romantic, intimate restaurant in the city. A place for lovers. It wasn't Per Se, and it was a charge made just 15 minutes ago. He wasn't stuck in a late meeting. He was out dining with someone else on their anniversary. The cold dread that had been a subtle undercurrent for months now flooded her, a tidal wave of ice. This was no longer about suspicion. This was about proof. The denial she had so carefully constructed crumbled into dust. He wasn't just distant. He was living a separate life, a life she was funding but was not invited to. As she stared at the notification on her phone, the name he'd mentioned that morning echoed in her mind. The Sinclair deal. Amber Sinclair. A sudden fierce resolve hardened her features. She would not sit here and wait for him to come home smelling of lies. She stood up, her movements stiff. She walked to his home office, a room she rarely entered. She didn't know what she was looking for, but she needed something tangible. A receipt, a note. Anything to prove she wasn't going insane. His laptop was open on his desk. She stared at it, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It was a violation of his privacy, an act of mistrust. But trust, she realized with a bitter pang, had already left the building. She touched the trackpad. The screen flickered to life. It was unlocked, and open on the screen was his personal email. The top message in the inbox made her breath catch in her throat. From Amber Sinclair. Subject. Tonight. Can't wait to have you all to myself tonight. Jay, forget the old ball and chain. The future is us. See you at our spot. All my love. A. The words blurred through her tears. Old ball and chain. That's what she was. A relic. An obstacle. The foundation upon which he built his empire now just a nuisance to be forgotten. The confirmation didn't bring relief, only a profound, soul-crushing agony. The picture-perfect life was a lie. The gilded cage was a prison, and the man she loved was a stranger. The drive into Manhattan was a blur of streetlights and tears. Clara didn't have a plan. She was operating on pure, unadulterated adrenaline, and a pain so sharp it felt physical. The text message, the email. They were a 1-2 punch that had knocked the wind out of her, leaving her gasping for a truth she could no longer ignore. Every traffic light seemed to mock her a glaring red symbol of the stop she should have put to her doubts months ago. She found the Gilded Lily nestled on a quiet, cobblestoned street in Soho. It was exactly as she'd imagined, discreet, elegant, with soft lighting that spilled onto the pavement, creating an aura of intimate secrets. She parked across the street, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. What was she going to do, Storm, in Make a Scene? The thought was terrifying, so contrary to her nature. She was Clara Croft, the poised wife, the calm mother. She didn't cause public disturbances, but the woman sitting in the driver's seat of the Lexus SUV was no longer just Clara Croft. She was a woman betrayed a woman whose entire world had been built on a foundation of lies. She watched the entrance for what felt like an eternity, her hands gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. And then she saw them. Julian emerged first, laughing, his arm draped possessively around Amber Sinclair's shoulders. Amber leaned into him, her blonde head resting on his chest for a moment, her face alight with a triumphant glow. She was wearing a stunning emerald green dress that clung to her body, a stark contrast to the conservative navy dress Clara wore. They looked like a power couple, radiant and untouchable. They looked like they belonged together. The sight was a dagger to Clara's heart, twisting with a brutal finality. He hailed a taxi. As he opened the door for Amber, he leaned in and kissed her a deep, passionate kiss under the soft glow of the street lamp. It wasn't a friendly peck. It was a lover's kiss full of intimacy and promise. Clara felt the air leave her lungs. This wasn't a fling. This was a relationship, a whole other life he was living without her. She followed the taxi, her mind a maelstrom of rage and grief. Her thoughts raced. Were they going back to his office, to a hotel? The taxi didn't head for the highway back to Westport. Instead, it pulled up in front of a sleek, modern apartment building in Tribeca, one she didn't recognize. She watched as Julian paid the driver, and they disappeared inside his arm, still firmly around Amber's waist. Clara sat in her car for a long time. The silence of the vehicle, a stark contrast to the screaming in her head. She knew with a sickening certainty that this was their place. The monster deal wasn't just business. It was the construction of a new life with a new woman. He wasn't just cheating on her. He was replacing her. The drive home was slow and deliberate. The tears were gone, replaced by an icy resolve. The hurt was still there, a gaping wound in her chest, but it was now surrounded by a cold, hard anger. When she walked back into the silent, cavernous house, it no longer felt like a home. It felt like a stage, a set for a play in which she had been unknowingly playing the fool. Julian arrived home just after 2 a.m. He tried to be quiet, but the heavy front door clicked shut with a definitive thud. Clara was waiting for him in the dimly lit living room, sitting in one of the oversized armchairs. She hadn't changed. The single glass of untouched champagne still sat on the table beside her. He froze when he saw her, the charming mask momentarily slipping. "Clara, you're still up," "Happy anniversary, Julian," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his practiced apology already forming on his lips. "Honey, I am so sorry. The Sinclair deal, it went into extra innings. We had to wine and dine the Japanese investors. They're notoriously difficult. I completely lost track of time. My phone died. I feel terrible." The lies were so effortless, so smooth. A year ago, she would have believed him. She would have felt a pang of guilt for doubting him. Now she just felt pity. Pity for him and for the fool she had been. She stood up slowly. "The Gilded Lily," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "Is that where the Japanese investors like to dine?" Julian's face went pale. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving his handsome features looking suddenly gaunt under the dim light. What? What are you talking about?" "The credit card alert, Julian, for $785. At a table for two, I presume." She took a step closer, her eyes locked on his. "And the apartment in Tribeca, is that where you hold your late-night business meetings? 2. He was cornered. For the first time in their marriage, she saw genuine panic in his eyes. His bluster deflated, replaced by a desperate scramble for a new lie. "Clara, you're not making any sense. You must be mistaken. You've been under a lot of stress." "Don't you dare!" she whispered, her voice trembling with repressed fury. "Don't you dare try to gaslight me again. I saw you, Julian. I saw you and Amber." The mention of Amber's name changed everything. The panic in his eyes hardened into something else, something cold and cruel. His posture shifted from defensive to aggressive. The mask was off. "So what if you did?" he sneered, his voice dropping to a low growl. "What were you doing, following me, spying on me? You're pathetic." The insult struck her, but she held her ground. "I am your wife. We have a family. We have a life. Or at least I thought we did." He let out a short, bitter laugh. "A life? This isn't a life, Clara. It's a performance. You, the perfect housewife in her perfect mansion. Me, the provider. It's been a bore for years." He took a step towards her, his presence suddenly menacing. "Amber. Amber understands me. She's smart. She's ambitious. She sees me for who I am, not just as a walking checkbook." Each word was a deliberate cruelty, designed to wound. He was dismantling their 15 years together, piece by piece, right in front of her. "I gave up my career for you," she said, her voice breaking. "I built this home. I raised your children. And you've been well compensated for it." He shot back, his eyes glinting with malice. "Don't pretend you're a martyr. You love this house, you love money, you just don't want to share it." The argument escalated, their voices rising in the cavernous room. It was a torrent of every unspoken resentment, every buried frustration from the past few years. Clara accused him of betrayal, of lies, of disrespect. He in turn painted her as a clinging, ungrateful, paranoid woman who was holding him back. He was rewriting their entire history, casting himself as the victim, the man trapped in a gilded cage with a boring wife. Then Clara said the words that would prove to be the final, irrevocable turning point. "I want you to leave," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Or I will. I'll take the children, and I will leave. We're done, Julian." His face contorted with rage. "You'll do nothing," he seethed. "This is my house. These are my children. You have nothing. You are nothing without me. They're my children too, and I will not have them raised by a liar and a cheat." That was when he lunged. But it was what he said next, his voice, a venomous hiss that would haunt her forever. "Amber was right. You're a leech. You need to be taught a lesson." The mention of Amber's name was the spark that ignited the inferno. It was one thing for Julian to be cruel, but to use his mistress's words as a weapon against his wife in their home, it was a desecration. It confirmed for Clara that this wasn't just Julian's decision. It was a shared cruelty, a verdict they had passed on her together. She said that... Clara's voice was barely a whisper, the fight draining out of her replaced by a hollow shock. Julian's face was a mask of pure fury. He saw her shock not as a sign of pain, but as a weakness to be exploited. "She sees you for what you are, Clara. A dead weight I've been dragging around for years. She told me I needed to cut you loose, and she was right." He was closing the space between them now, his large frame seeming to suck all the air out of the room. Clara instinctively took a step back, her hand flying to her throat. This was a side of Julian she had never seen. The charming veneer had been stripped away, revealing something ugly and violent beneath. "Get out, Julian." She repeated, her voice stronger this time, fueled by a primal mix of fear and defiance. "I mean it. Get out of this house now." "This is my house," he roared, his voice bouncing off the high ceilings. "Everything you have is because of me." He was inches from her now, his finger jabbing at her chest. "You are not going to ruin my life because you're feeling a little insecure." "My insecurity?" she cried, shoving his hand away. "You're the one living a double life. You're the one destroying this family for a cheap affair." The moment the words "cheap affair" left her lips, something snapped in his eyes. His face, which had been red with anger, turned deathly pale. His rage became something colder, more focused. "Don't you dare talk about her that way," he hissed. He grabbed her by the upper arms, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons. The strength in his grip was terrifying. Clara cried out, a mix of surprise and pain. "Let go of me, Julian. You're hurting me." "You want to know what hurt is?" He snarled, his face contorted. "Hurt is being trapped in a loveless marriage with a woman who hasn't had an original thought in a decade. Hurt is having to pretend to care about PTA meetings and garden parties while my life is passing me by." He shoved her backward. Clara stumbled, her heel catching on the edge of the expensive Persian rug. She fell hard, her head cracking against the sharp corner of the marble coffee table. A blinding, white-hot pain exploded behind her eyes. For a moment, the world went black. Stars bursting in her vision. Dazed, she lay on the floor, the room spinning around her. She could taste blood in her mouth. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard him standing over her. She expected to hear concern, maybe even panic at what he'd done. Instead, what she heard chilled her to the bone. "See," he said, his voice laced with a terrifying calm. "This is what happens when you push me. This is what you get." He wasn't sorry. He was justifying it. Clara pushed herself up onto her elbows, her vision slowly clearing. Her head throbbed with a nauseating rhythm. She touched her fingers to the back of her head, and they came away wet and sticky with blood. The sight of it, dark red against her pale skin, jolted her out of her daze. He had hurt her. He had physically, violently hurt her. For his mistress. "You hit me." She breathed the words, heavy with disbelief. "You fell," he corrected coldly. "You were hysterical, and you tripped. That's what happened. That's the story." He was already creating the narrative the next in a long line of lies. He wasn't her husband anymore. He was her adversary. He was a threat. The thought of her children asleep upstairs, oblivious to the monster their father had become, sent a jolt of pure protective terror through her. She had to get them out. She had to get them away from him. Scrambling to her feet, ignoring the dizzying pain in her head, she made a run for the grand staircase. "Stay away from me. Stay away from us." He was faster. He caught her at the base of the stairs, grabbing a fistful of her hair and yanking her back with such force that she screamed. The pain was sharp and searing. "You are not going anywhere," he bellowed, his face inches from hers, his breath hot and sour with whiskey. "You're not taking my children. You're not taking my money. You will stay here, and you will play the part of the loving wife, or I swear to God, Clara, I will make your life a living hell." It was in that moment, with his hand twisted in her hair and his eyes filled with a hatred she never thought possible, that the love she once had for him died completely. It wasn't a slow fade. It was an instantaneous, violent death extinguished by his brutality. In its place, something new was born, a steely, unyielding resolve. With a surge of adrenaline she didn't know she possessed, she drove her elbow back into his gut. He grunted, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She wrenched herself free, stumbling up the first few stairs. He lunged for her again, but this time she was ready. She turned and kicked out her heel, connecting squarely with his chest. It wasn't a powerful blow, but it was enough to make him stagger backward. "Don't touch me again," she said, her voice low and shaking with a fury she'd never felt before. He stared at her, breathing heavily, more surprised than hurt. He saw the look in her eyes. The fear was gone, replaced by something he didn't recognize. Something that wasn't going to break. He straightened his shirt, his composure slowly returning. A cruel, calculating smirk spread across his face. "Fine," he said smoothly. "Have it your way. But you're making a very, very big mistake. You have no idea who you're dealing with." He turned and walked calmly to the front door. "I'll be at the club," he said over his shoulder. "When you've had time to cool down and see reason, we can talk. But this conversation is over." The door clicked shut, leaving Clara alone in the echoing silence of the foyer. She stood trembling on the stairs, her hand flying to her throbbing head, her scalp aching where he had pulled her hair. The magnificent house, her gilded cage, now felt like a crime scene. She looked at her reflection in the large, ornate mirror on the wall. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock. A thin trickle of blood ran from her hairline, down her temple. She saw the bruises already beginning to form on her arms where he'd grabbed her. She wasn't just a wife anymore. She was a victim, and she had the evidence to prove it. Ignoring the pain, she walked on unsteady legs to the kitchen, grabbed a handful of ice, and wrapped it in a dish towel, pressing it to her head. Then she walked back to the living room and took out her phone. Her first instinct was to call the police, but Julian's parting threat echoed in her ears. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." He was powerful. He had connections. He would twist the story. He'd already told her what the story would be. She was hysterical. She fell. No. She needed a different kind of help. She took several clear, unflinching photos of her injuries, the cut on her head, the angry red marks on her arms, the developing bruise on her cheekbone where her face had hit the table. She time-stamped them. Then she scrolled through her contacts, her finger hovering over a name she hadn't needed in years, but one she had kept for a reason she never wanted to admit to herself. Her college friend, Eleanor Vance. Now one of the most feared and respected divorce attorneys in the state of New York. She pressed the call button. when Eleanor's sleepy voice answered Clara's broke. "Ellie!" She sobbed, the dam of her composure finally breaking. "It's Clara. I need your help. Julian. He hurt me." The next few hours were a blur of calculated, terrified action. On Eleanor's stark instructions over the phone, Clara did not wash the blood from her hair. She did not change her clothes. "Go to the emergency room in Stamford, not Westport," Eleanor commanded, her voice sharp and clear, cutting through Clara's panic. "Tell them exactly what happened. Use the word assaulted. Get a full medical report. Then pack a go-bag for you and the children. Only essentials. Passports, birth certificates, a few changes of clothes. Meet me at my office at 8 a.m. sharp. Do not go back to the house." Waking Lily and Sam was the hardest part. She gently shook them awake, her heart aching at their sleepy, confused faces. "We're going on a little adventure, sweethearts," she whispered, forcing a smile that felt like cracking glass. She helped them pack their favorite toys and books into their backpacks, her movements frantic but quiet. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot in the silent house. She expected Julian to walk back through the door at any moment. By 4 a.m., they were gone. Clara drove away from the mansion that had been her entire world for 15 years, not even daring to look at it in the rear-view mirror. The trip to the ER was humiliating. The nurses were kind, but the questions were clinical and sharp. The doctor documented every bruise, every cut, his expression grim. They gave her a pamphlet on domestic violence shelters. It all felt surreal, like she was watching a movie about someone else's life. Eleanor Vance's office was a sleek, minimalist space in a downtown skyscraper, a world away from the chintz and comfort of Westport. Eleanor, or Ellie, as Clara had known her, was no longer the free-spirited art history major from college. She was a woman clad in a steel-grey power suit, her gaze intense, her presence formidable. She hugged Clara tightly, then immediately switched into professional mode. "Okay, Clara, let's get to work," she said, leading her to a conference room. "The medical report is crucial. Your photos are excellent. We filed for an emergency protective order this morning. He will be legally barred from the house and from contacting you or the children." Julian was served the papers at his office that afternoon. The explosion was immediate. Clara's phone, which she had been advised by Eleanor to keep on but not answer, lit up with a furious barrage of calls and texts. "Julian, what the hell is this? Are you insane? Julian, you can't keep me from my own children. I will destroy you for this, Clara. Julian, call me back now. You are making the biggest mistake of your life." Then came the calls from his lawyer, a notoriously aggressive attorney named Marcus Thorne. He left a chillingly polite voicemail for Eleanor, which she played for Clara on speakerphone. "Ms. Vance," Thorne's smooth voice began, "my client, Mr. Croft, is deeply concerned for his wife's mental stability. He informs me she had a hysterical episode last night, tripped and hit her head. Her accusations are slanderous and are clearly a ploy for a larger settlement in a divorce she seems intent on pursuing. We are prepared to fight this with every resource at our disposal." "He's already spinning it," Clara said, her voice shaking. "Of course he is," Eleanor said calmly, her eyes like chips of flint. "This is what men like Julian Croft do. They control the narrative. Our job is to take that control away from him, and we do that with facts, not emotion." The first battle began immediately. Julian, through his lawyer, filed a motion to have the protective order thrown out, submitting affidavits from friends and business partners attesting to his gentle nature and Clara's recent emotional volatility. Simultaneously, he cut her off financially. Every joint credit card was declined. The debit card for their shared account was frozen. Suddenly, Clara, a woman who had never had to look at a price tag, couldn't even buy her children a happy meal. Eleanor had anticipated this. She had a fund set aside for clients in exactly this situation. She put Clara and the children up in a secure extended-stay hotel and gave her a prepaid credit card for immediate expenses. "He thinks he can starve you out," Eleanor explained, her expression grim. "He wants you desperate and crawling back to him, willing to accept whatever scraps he throws your way. We are going to show him how badly he has underestimated you." The next 2 weeks were a grueling introduction to Clara's new reality. Life was a series of meetings with lawyers, forensic accountants, and child psychologists. The children were confused and scared. Lily was old enough to sense the tension and asked difficult questions Clara struggled to answer. Sam had started having nightmares. The secure but sterile hotel suite felt a world away from their sprawling home and backyard. Julian, meanwhile, launched a campaign of psychological warfare. He used their mutual friends to get messages to her, painting himself as the heartbroken husband worried about his unstable wife. He sent lavish gifts for the children to the hotel, along with notes saying how much their daddy missed them, a move Eleanor identified as a clear attempt to manipulate the kids and guilt-trip Clara. But Julian's arrogance was his Achilles heel. He believed he was invincible, that his money and influence made him untouchable. He refused every settlement offer Eleanor put on the table, convinced he could crush Clara in court. "He wants to go to war, Ellie," Clara said one evening, exhausted after another 10-hour day of depositions. "He wants to humiliate me." "Let him," Eleanor replied with a thin smile. "Arrogant men make mistakes, and while he's busy trying to prove you're an unfit mother, my team is doing a deep dive into something he values more than his children, his money." The forensic accounting team Eleanor had hired was led by a quiet, meticulous man named David Brown. He spent weeks combing through thousands of pages of financial documents from Croft Holdings. At first, everything seemed to be in order. Julian's company was on the surface a massive success, valued at over $100 million. But David Brown was looking for the things Julian didn't want anyone to see. He cross-referenced LLCs, followed money into offshore accounts, and analyzed investment patterns. One evening, he called Eleanor with a tremor of excitement in his voice. "I think I've found something," he said. "It's a series of wire transfers, very cleverly hidden. Large sums of money moving from Croft Holdings into a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. The name of the corporation is AS Enterprises." "A.S.," Eleanor repeated slowly. "Amber Sinclair." "That's what I thought," David confirmed. "It looks like he's been systematically siphoning millions of dollars out of the marital asset pool and hiding it. But it gets worse. I've been looking at the projections for his latest development, the big Sinclair deal he's so proud of. The numbers are creative. He's leveraged the company to the hilt to fund this thing. He's counting on a massive payday. But if anything goes wrong, a shift in the market, a delay in construction, the whole house of cards could come crashing down." Eleanor hung up the phone, a predatory gleam in her eye. Julian wasn't just a cheater and an abuser. He was a fraud. He was trying to hide assets from his wife while simultaneously gambling the entire family's fortune on a risky venture, likely at the urging of his new partner. "Clara," Eleanor said, turning to her client, "we need to talk. I think we just found the key to dismantling Julian Croft's entire empire." The first battle had been about survival. The next one would be about justice. The discovery of AS Enterprises shifted the entire landscape of the case. It was no longer just a contentious divorce. It was a potential case of large-scale financial fraud. Eleanor Vance knew that in a high-stakes divorce, the person who controls the financial narrative often wins. Julian had tried to paint Clara as a gold digger, but Eleanor was about to paint him as a thief. The forensic accountant, David Brown, delved deeper. He worked tirelessly, his team tracing the flow of money like digital bloodhounds. They discovered that AS Enterprises wasn't just a holding company. It had made significant investments. It had purchased a multi-million-dollar apartment in Tribeca, the one Clara had seen them enter, and a portfolio of luxury goods, a new Porsche expensive jewelry designer clothes. All of it paid for with money funneled from Croft Holdings money that was legally half Clara's. He wasn't just having an affair, Eleanor explained to a stunned Clara. He was building a new life for Amber with your money. He was systematically liquidating your shared future to fund his. The betrayal cut deeper than Clara could have imagined. It wasn't just infidelity. It was calculated, cold-blooded theft. While she was managing their home and raising their children, he had been meticulously stealing from them. But David Brown found something even more damning. Julian's monster Sinclair deal was a ticking time bomb. He had secured massive loans based on inflated property value projections and fraudulent occupancy commitments. It was a classic developer's gamble, but on a colossal scale. He had essentially mortgaged the entire company on this one project. He's in a precarious position, David summarized. He needs this project to succeed, or he's facing total financial ruin and possibly even criminal charges for bank fraud. He is desperate. This desperation explained his aggression, his refusal to settle. He couldn't afford to give Clara a fair share of the company, because in reality the company's value was a fiction. He needed every penny to keep his house of cards from collapsing. Eleanor knew they needed more than just financial records. They needed a human element, someone from the inside. "Who did he fire recently?" Eleanor asked Clara one afternoon. "Think back over the last year. Any senior people let go suddenly?" Clara thought for a moment. There was Robert Aiken, she recalled. He was the chief financial officer for almost a decade, a very by-the-book, cautious man. Julian replaced him about 8 months ago. He said Robert was too conservative for the company's new aggressive growth phase. He promoted someone younger. "Who did he promote?" Eleanor asked, her pen poised over her legal pad. "I think his name was Greg Milner. Julian liked him because he was a yes man." Eleanor's team immediately went to work trying to find Robert Aiken. They located him in Florida, where he'd taken an early retirement. At first, he was reluctant to speak, bound by a non-disclosure agreement and a hefty severance package. But Eleanor was persuasive. She explained that she wasn't interested in his breach of the NDA, but in potential criminal fraud. He might have been pressured to overlook it. She flew down to meet him in person. Over coffee, in a quiet Tampa cafe, Robert Aiken, a man with a tired face and honest eyes, finally opened up. "Julian Croft is a brilliant salesman." Robert began stirring his coffee. "He can sell sand in the desert. But his ethics, they became flexible. It all started when Amber Sinclair came on board. She was ambitious and she fed his ego. She convinced him he was a visionary, that traditional risk assessment was for lesser men." Robert detailed how Amber and Julian had cooked up the Sinclair deal. He had warned Julian repeatedly that the financial models were reckless, that they were misleading investors and the banks. "I told him it was fraud, plain and simple." Robert said, his voice low. "I refused to sign off on the loan documents, so he offered me a generous package to retire and replaced me with Greg Milner, who would sign anything Julian put in front of him. I took the money because I have a family to support, and I knew Julian would ruin my reputation if I went public. He would have painted me as a disgruntled employee. Robert Aiken was their star witness. He could testify to the company's true financial state and Julian's fraudulent activities. He even had copies of his original undoctored financial models for the Sinclair project, which he had saved on a personal hard drive as an insurance policy. While the financial case was building, Eleanor didn't neglect the domestic abuse charge. Julian's lawyer, Marcus Thorne, was working hard to discredit Clara, preparing to argue that her injuries were self-inflicted in a desperate grab for money. "They will try to tear you apart on the stand, Clara," Eleanor warned her. "They will bring up every argument you ever had, every time you were emotional. They will try to paint you as unstable." Clara felt a knot of fear in her stomach. "But he assaulted me. I have the medical report." "And they will say you are a liar. It will be your word against his. Julian Croft, the beloved community leader, versus the hysterical housewife. In court, it's about what you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt." Clara's face fell. It seemed so unfair. Just as despair began to set in, she remembered something. It was a small detail, something she hadn't thought was important. "The living room," she said slowly. "A few months ago, Julian installed a new smart home system. You know, voice-activated controls for the lights, music, security. He loved showing it off." Eleanor sat bolt upright. "What's the brand name of the system?" Clara told her. Eleanor immediately got on the phone with a tech expert. "These devices," the expert explained, "they're always listening for a wake word, but they also store short, temporary audio buffers, and sometimes during a significant auditory event like a loud crash or a scream, the device can be triggered to save a recording to the cloud." The chance was slim, but it was a chance. Eleanor's team drafted a subpoena for the tech company, demanding any and all audio files recorded in the Croft residence on the night of the assault. Julian's lawyers fought it ferociously, citing privacy concerns, but the judge, intrigued by the possibility, granted the request. Weeks went by. The trial date loomed. Clara was a nervous wreck preparing for the character assassination she knew was coming. Then one rainy Tuesday afternoon, Eleanor called her. "We got it, Clara," Eleanor said, her voice tight with excitement. "The company sent the file. It's 37 seconds long. I'm sending it to you now. Brace yourself." Clara's hands trembled as she opened the email and downloaded the audio file. She put her phone to her ear and pressed play. The quality was slightly muffled, but it was undeniably clear. It began with the sound of her own voice, strained and high-pitched, destroying this family for a cheap affair. Then Julian's voice, low and menacing. "Don't you dare talk about her that way." There was the sound of a scuffle, her own pained cry. "Let go of me, Julian. You're hurting me." And then his voice dripping with venom. "You want to know what hurt is? Hurt is being trapped in a loveless marriage." The recording continued, capturing the sickening thud of her head, hitting the table, followed by a moment of silence, and then Julian's chilling, damning words. "See, this is what happens when you push me. This is what you get." It was all there. His rage, his violence, and most importantly, his own admission, his justification of the act. He hadn't said, "Did you fall?" He had said, "This is what happens when you push me." It was proof, irrefutable, undeniable proof. Clara sank into a chair, tears streaming down her face. They weren't tears of sadness this time. They were tears of relief. Julian Croft, the master of the narrative, had no idea that his own beloved gadget had been recording the truth. His own arrogance had once again become his greatest enemy. The courtroom was Julian Croft's new stage, and he played the part of the wronged husband to perfection. Dressed in a somber, bespoke suit, he sat beside his lawyer, Marcus Thorne, his face a carefully constructed mask of concern. He cast sorrowful glances toward Clara, a performance for the judge who would decide his fate. Across the aisle, Clara sat beside Eleanor Vance, a silent statue of resolve, her hands clasped to still their trembling. The trial began with a brutal, calculated assault on Clara's character. Marcus Thorne, a master of courtroom theatre, called witnesses who painted Clara as emotional and erratic. He twisted her fear of Julian's affair into a narrative of obsession and paranoia. When Clara took the stand, Thorne's cross-examination was a masterclass in insinuation. "Mrs. Croft," he began, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Isn't it true you were terrified of losing the luxurious lifestyle your husband provided? Isn't it true that when you discovered he had a new successful colleague, you became hysterical and followed him fabricating this story of abuse to secure a larger settlement?" Through it all, Clara held her ground, her voice steady. "I was terrified of the man who was lying to me and hurting me," she stated, simply refusing to let Thorne rattle her. But she could feel the doubt he was planting in the air. Soon it was Julian's turn to testify. He strode to the witness box with an air of confidence, flashing a reassuring smile at the judge. He recounted his version of their anniversary night with polished ease. "Clara was hysterical," he said, his voice laced with regret. "She was making wild accusations. She lost her footing and tragically she fell. It was a terrible accident. I would never ever lay a hand on my wife." Eleanor Vance began her cross-examination, her questions like surgical incisions. She first dismantled his financial empire. She produced the wire transfers to AS Enterprises, the shell company named for Amber Sinclair. "Mr. Croft, you used this company to funnel over $4 million of marital assets to purchase an apartment and a Porsche for your mistress, did you not?" Julian sputtered, his composure cracking. "It's a legitimate corporate entity." Then Eleanor called Robert Aiken, the former CFO. Aiken calmly and methodically exposed the truth of Croft Holdings. He testified that the company was leveraged to the hilt, propped up by fraudulent loan applications for the Sinclair deal, a project he called a catastrophe waiting to happen. Julian's face turned ashen as the image of his untouchable empire was revealed to be a house of cards. But Eleanor saved her final devastating blow for the assault itself. "Your Honor," she announced, "the plaintiff would like to introduce one final piece of evidence." A court officer placed a speaker on the table. Julian watched a knot of confusion and fear tightening in his chest. "Mr. Croft," Eleanor said, her voice sharp, "you testified under oath that your wife's injury was an accident, that she fell. Is that correct?" "That is the absolute truth," Julian declared, his voice a shade too loud. "Then perhaps you can explain this," Eleanor said, and pressed play. The courtroom fell silent, filled only by the tinny audio from the smart home device. First came Clara's voice, "Destroying this family for a cheap affair." Then Julian's menacing reply, the sounds of a scuffle, and Clara's pained cry. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Every eye was locked on Julian Croft as his face contorted in a mask of pure horror. He looked like a man watching his own execution. A sickening thud echoed from the speaker, followed by a collective gasp from the gallery. And finally Julian's own voice, clear as day, dripping with cold justification. "See? This is what happens when you push me. This is what you get." The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus Thorne dropped his head into his hands. Julian stared at the speaker as if it were a venomous snake, his mouth agape. He had been exposed not by a witness, but by his own voice, his own words, his own monstrous truth. Eleanor let the silence hang in the air before delivering the final blow. "Mr. Croft," she said quietly but with immense power, "this is what happens when you push me. Those are not the words of a man witnessing an accident. They are the words of an abuser." The verdict delivered 2 days later was an annihilation. Judge Miller, looking down from the bench, found Julian Croft guilty of assault. She referred him to the district attorney's office for perjury. The protective order was made permanent. On the division of assets, the judgment was even more ruinous. Citing Julian's egregious financial misconduct in attempting to hide millions with his mistress, the judge awarded Clara 100% of the value of those stolen funds. The apartment, the car, the jewelry. It was all hers. She was then awarded 70% of the remaining marital assets, which, thanks to Robert Aiken's testimony, was now understood to be 70% of a bankrupt, debt-ridden company. Clara was granted sole legal and physical custody of their children. Julian was permitted supervised visitation twice a month, but only after completing a year-long batterers intervention program. His child support and alimony payments were based on his former 9-figure income, a crippling sum he now had no way to earn. As a final indignity, the judge awarded Clara exclusive use of the Westport mansion, giving Julian 48 hours to remove his personal belongings under court supervision. As the verdict was read, Julian sat frozen. The color drained from his face. His amour, his reputation, his family, all gone. In the gallery, he saw Amber Sinclair slip out of the door, abandoning the sinking ship, without a backward glance. He had lost everything for a woman who was now running from the wreckage. The aftermath was a swift and total collapse. Croft Holdings filed for bankruptcy. The media savaged him. He became a social pariah, a cautionary tale whispered at the country clubs he could no longer afford. Clara, guided by Eleanor, made no attempt to salvage Julian's toxic legacy. She sold the cavernous mansion and its haunting memories. She sold the Tribeca apartment and the Porsche. After her legal fees were paid, she was left with a comfortable but modest nest egg. She bought a smaller, light-filled house in a new town, a place with no ghosts. She enrolled Lily and Sam in the local school and started taking architecture classes again, rediscovering the part of herself she had sacrificed for Julian. Her life was no longer one of extreme luxury, but it was filled with peace and purpose. It was real. A year later, while gardening in her new backyard, she received a postcard from Florida. It was from Robert Aiken. "Clara," it read, "what you did took incredible courage. Thank you." She held the note to her chest and smiled. The gilded cage had been demolished. She had lost a fortune, but in exchange, she had won back her freedom, her future, and herself. She was no longer Julian Croft's wife. She was just Clara, and for the first time in a very long time, she was truly home. Clara's story is a powerful testament to the fact that truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of coming to light. It's a chilling reminder that the most polished facades can hide the darkest secrets. Julian Croft believed his money and power made him invincible, but he forgot that character is the one asset you can't buy, and the easiest one to lose. He beat his wife for his mistress, And in the end, the scales of justice didn't just balance, they tipped so far, they crushed the very foundations of his world. This story is about more than just a verdict. It's about the incredible resilience of the human spirit and the courage it takes to walk away from a beautiful lie to build a true life. If this story moved you, if it made you think, or if you believe in the power of justice, please take a moment to hit that like button. Share this video with someone who might need to hear a story of strength and survival. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that matter. What part of Clara's journey resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.